I have had the distinct pleasure of introducing him on a number of occasions, and I don't know what else new I could tell you about him because you know him quite well. His books have earned him distinction all over America. We're certainly proud to claim him as a native Georgian. His work speaks for itself. It is rich in character. It is rich in storytelling. And Terry has given of himself so generously throughout his life to help other writers, to support literary institutions. I can't say enough wonderful things about him. But again, I don't know exactly what to tell you that you don't know about him tonight. So I've decided I'm going to give you a sneak peek at something that I didn't decide until just a moment ago to tell you. There is something in this state called the Lindbergh Award. It's a very elite award. It's only gone to a few writers to this point. It recognizes a writer for a lifetime achievement in literature, for making distinguished contributions to a life in literature. It is not public knowledge yet. But I will tell you right now, before it becomes public knowledge in just a few weeks, that the recipient of that award this year is Terry Kay. Folks, there is not a finer human being on this planet who deserves that honor. And it will be one of the great pleasures for me to help present that to him when he gets it. The award is not going to be given until the 1st of December at a special ceremony. There'll be lots more details about this coming out, including some wonderful surprises that I can't tell you about now. But this is surprise enough. So with that point, since you know what's coming up for Terry, and you know, because you're here tonight, that he has a wonderful brand new novel, The Book of Marie, let's just go ahead and bring him on, and please recognize the very wonderful and gifted Terry Kay.
Thank you, Bill. And to all of you for your warm acceptance of this great news about receiving the Lindbergh Award. I am truly honored to have been named the recipient of that award. Stan Lindbergh was a dear friend of mine. He was the editor of the Georgia Review for many, many years, I think as many of you know. This is the kind of friendship that he and I had. I never submitted anything to him for possible publication in the Georgia Review. And he once asked me, why haven't you done that? And I said, Stan, I just simply couldn't take being turned down by you. And I know that's exactly what would happen if I gave you anything. Because he turned down people like Eudora Welty, for crying out loud. And I had this great fear. And part of it was that I didn't want him to catch me in all the errors that I make when I write. I'm not a gifted person when it comes to making sure the comma's in the right place. And I don't even know what they are. I have never known what they are. It's strange to have to make that confession to you. And before I start talking about that, I guess I should ask this. Is anybody here from my hometown? Anybody? Where are you from? Decatur, okay. No, from my hometown over in Royston, Georgia. Bowman. Alberton. Oh, yeah, that's right. We got Alberton, for God's sakes. We don't. Alberton was a metropolitan city compared to Royston. Anyway, I'm always reluctant to make some comments if I know that there's somebody from my hometown or they have a relative, or something, because it gets back. you know. They don't like me over there for lots of reasons, I suppose. But one of them is, and I have to say this truthfully, I didn't have any background at all coming out of high school for becoming a writer. None. The lady who taught English, and she was a very lovely person, sweet, and, but she wasn't overly knowledgeable about English. Struggling often with the difference between a subject and a verb. And those of us who were students at Royston High School back in the early 50s, we, especially when we played football, and obviously you can look at me and know that I played football. Right? You can't have an athletic physique like this and not play football. Anyway, the rule that we had, and it happens to be in this new book, the rule that we had at that time was if you played football, you took English together in the library. And we only had, 300 books, I suppose, in the entire school. I'm not lying. This is true. This was a Class C school. Yeah, that's right. It was a Class C school. We don't have Class C schools anymore. Do you know that? We don't have Class B schools either. A, double A, triple A, quad A, A. And we do that because we don't want to make our children feel inferior. We were Class C and proud to be Class C. We certainly didn't earn it by any standards of intellect, I can assure you. But we would go to the library for English classes. She stood at the door with an armful of magazines, and as we walked in, gave us a magazine. Each of the football players got a magazine, and our only responsibility was to walk to the back of the room and select a desk and sit there and read the magazine and not disturb the class. That was okay, I suppose. But I had this thing that I just had to argue at times with some of the stuff that she would say, and she stayed frustrated with me a great deal. I can assure you. We got our grades, by the way, by the position that you played on the football team. I was the quarterback, and obviously I was a straight A student. And that's because I was the only person on the team that knew all 5 plays. We ran complicated offenses. We'd get in the huddle and I'd say, "Who wants to carry the ball?" And then we'd have to sometime assign somebody because not many people wanted to carry the ball in those days. But the guys that played in the line, they made C. All of them did. And they should have. They got hit every time. Kind of a dumb thing. So I was not prepared to become a writer, and I've told these stories many, many, many times. I became a writer 2.5 blocks from here. In a building that doesn't exist anymore, for a newspaper that I don't think exists anymore, the Decatur DeKalb News. This goes back, a lot of you would remember this newspaper. I took a job at $40 a week in 1959 as an errand boy. I swept the floor, I ran errands, I did things like that. And I did it, well, I just needed a job. I needed a job, married, and I wanted to be a responsible husband, so I had a job, and my wife didn't like it, and she made me quit it. And so I took this one, but I noticed that the people doing the writing were the ones having fun. And so I asked one day if I could write something, and they said, well, sure. They didn't care. They just needed something to put on top of the ads. It didn't matter much what it was. I just needed something to go on top of the ads. And there was a column on the front page of that newspaper back in those days called DeKalb After Dark. Do any of you remember this thing called DeKalb After Dark? It was written by Etoyan Shredlu. And I went to the managing editor one day, Linton Broom, and I said, Linton, I don't know who this foreigner is, but he can't write. And Linton said, you don't think so? I said, no, he can't write a lick. He said, you think you could do better? I said, Linton, I could do better in the 10th grade, and let me tell you about my English teacher. Anyway, we started, and he said, why don't you write it next week? And so I did. I went out and I visited with the DeKalb police and came back, and I wrote this, and it came out in the paper, DeKalb After Dark by Etoyan Shredlu. And I thought, well, they just forgot to put my name on it. But I won't say anything. I sent it to my mother and said, Mama, I'll straighten this out, but this is something that your son wrote. And so next week I wrote it, and it came out Etoyan Shredlu. And the third week it came out Etoyan Shredlu. And I finally asked one of the guys in the composing room, I said, why don't you guys get my name and put it on this column? He looked at me and he said, you don't know what that is, do you? I said, no, what? And he took me to then a linotype machine. Now, of course, all this is a mystery to those of you who know only the computer. But the linotype machine, he raked his fingers down the first two rows, and it spelled Etoyan Shredlu. It was amazing. After I said, oh, my Lord. I said, Thomas, who was writing this column before I started? He said, well, Linton was. Didn't you know? This is a true story. I don't know why he didn't fire me. I would have. But actually, after the first column, he came to me and he said, you know, you were right. You are better, so why don't you keep writing it? Anyway, that's how I got into writing. And I loved doing it. It was a perfect thing for me to do because you could make a fool out of yourself. Only by making a fool out of yourself can you learn how to write, which is one of the great problems with teaching writing in school, because we don't let children make a fool out of themselves, and they ought to. I have a friend who retired from teaching writing at the Padea School. Some of you will know that school. He had this habit. Before he would begin a class, every child in his class had to stand up and make a fool out of himself or herself. They had to be laughed at. And he didn't care if it took a day or a week. It didn't matter to him. They had to be laughed at because he wanted them to understand it's all right. It's okay to do something silly. It's okay to do something stupid. We all do that when we write. And if you think that there are writers who don't, who put it down and it's magic, it's something that, has come from the muses and it streams out of them, that's just a lie. That's not true. It doesn't work that way. It works that you do it, and you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again. Over and over and over. You see this book? Let me see. This book has, I don't remember exactly, 271 pages in it. The 271 pages in this book whittled down from over 8,000 typewritten pages. I want you to know, 8,000 typewritten pages. And here's why. This is the 6th or 7th, I don't remember, version of this story, of this book. It was supposed, and you will see that in the book when you buy it, and I hope you do. it was supposed to have been part of a novel I wrote many years ago called A Prayer of Dreamers. And this was about a young black boy and a young white boy born in the same rural community on the same day in the same hour and become great friends. It was the basis for my novel called The Runaway, which Hallmark Hall of Fame did a movie on, some of you may have seen. If you didn't, please don't ever look at it. It was awful. It was just god-awful. They've done a very nice job on the other two, but this one was horrible. Anyway, the people in New York would not accept the whole novel. They only took the first part of it. And I decided that I liked the two other parts better, and that one day I would find the story that was in there. I wrote it, they turned it down. I wrote it, they turned it down. I wrote it, they turned it. This went on for 4 or 5 times. I wrote it in first person. I wrote it in second person. I wrote it in third person. Fourth person, fifth person. I wrote it every way it could be written, and it didn't work. And finally I decided, okay, go back and look at the people that you've been writing about and see among those people the one that you feel more comfortable with. There's only one magic in writing people. Only one. The rest of it's work. The one magic is when you let characters talk to you. And they do that. They actually do that. I mean, you've got to be a little weird to hear them, but they do it. They talk to you. And if you're patient enough with them and let them trust you, then they'll come, and the story that you've got is revealed. I don't write to tell a story. I write to discover one. I write to discover one for myself with hopes that it will be something that readers will also discover and feel good about. I think it's incredibly important to have that take on writing, especially if you're doing fiction. Now, nonfiction, poetry, other things are different, but in fiction, I think it works this way best. This story is about a young boy, a young man in high school. Same year that I was in high school, he too was a quarterback on a football team with a bunch of crazy people. He played for a football coach who was crazy, as I did. My coach was committed to an institution the year after I graduated, and so was this one. This is true. He actually was. Great guy, but he did some odd things. And we were playing a game one night. Guys, I've told this story. Have you heard this story, Jim? Anyway, those of you who haven't heard this story, we were playing in a game down in South Georgia one Friday night, and the young man came on the field to take my place, David Strickland. And I said, David, get off the field. And he came back the next play, and I sent him off. And his third play, and I sent him off. The fourth play, he came back on, and he was, panting, sweating. And he said, Terry, the coach is going to kill you if you don't get off the field. And I looked over, and the coach was standing over there with a water bucket in his hand, swinging the water bucket. And his eyes were rolling. He was foaming at the mouth. So I went off the field, and he reached out and he caught me under the shoulder pads. He was a strong guy. And he lifted me off the ground and began to shake me. And he said, when I send in for you to punt the ball, punt the ball. And I said, Coach, please, put me down. And he put me down. I said, Coach, we can't punt it. He said, why not? I said, we ain't got it. We're on defense. This is a true story. His eyes rolled, he foamed at the mouth a little more, and he said, when you get it, punt it. Of such is literature. Anyway, in 1954, the fall of 1954, at this fictitious high school, a young girl shows up who's moved there for her senior class year from Washington, D.C. She's brilliant. She's also something of a an agitator, I guess you could say. She knows what's going to happen. She knows that desegregation is coming. She knows how times are going to change. And she begins to agitate for that. Everybody is terrified of her, the teachers, her fellow students, classmates, etc. Well, on a dare, this young man, Cole, asked her for a date. They paid him $30, so he asked her for a date. And they go out on this date, and he suddenly is in the company of the strangest human being he's ever been in the company of. They play this charade the entire high school senior year, where they're boyfriend, girlfriend, when they're not really at all. But they are very close friends. There is an issue where the little girl, the girl, Marie, wants to teach these 4 young black children how to read in her garage of her parents' home. Well, that's ended immediately, and it causes a real concern in the community when it gets out. Anyway, graduation, she's a valedictorian, she gives her speech, and her speech is a powerful thing. It says, this is what's going to happen. And when she says, people are stunned that she would take this forum to make these comments. She leaves the place. He goes in search of her and finds her down a swing set. And this is the last time they're ever together. When she talks about their experience together and what's going to happen. She's leaving the next day. She's going to go to school at Harvard and blah, blah, blah. But and this is throughout the entire book, letters that go on between Marie and Cole. This, throughout the book, throughout their life span, they write these letters, but they never again see one another. But the letters, as I wrote, I began to realize I was working with something that I didn't know about in the previous efforts. I was working with a love story. This was a love story. This man was in love with her, and she was in love with him. And there's something almost tragic, well, there's something that is tragic about that understanding, and yet the separation that happens. I want to read one of those letters, if I can find the one I want to read, just to give you some idea, because I love her voice. And as a writer, I absolutely love This is one of the early letters that she writes to him. I like this because in this form of writing, you have an opportunity to do more about description of character than you do in any other form, I think, personally. Because I think that the reader is subconsciously applies his or her description to what he or she is reading. Anyway, this is a letter. You should be here, my naive, mendacious friend. I'd like to hide behind trees and in doorways and watch you wandering around. You'd look lost, and you would be. There are things here that your feeble mind could never comprehend because you're a hick, and you'll always be a hick. How you'll ever become famous, I have no idea. And if I didn't believe in fate, I would never believe it would happen. God, I miss you. There's not a fool in this city as gullible or as grand as you. As to the photograph, I hope you choose to keep it and occasionally take the time to look at it. This is a photograph of their junior-senior thing. We were both beautiful that night, but I want us to make an agreement. Never send photographs to one another. Even better, never call me, never send me a telegram or a message by a carrier pigeon. If you choose to communicate with me, I want it to be by letter. When I think of you, as I often do against my better instincts, I want to open my photo album and remember you from that night. And I want to read your letters and listen to your voice rise up out of your words. If we do have a friendship, let it be that, Cole. A friendship of words, not pictures. That way we'll never age, will we? We can be one of those happy ever after couples you dream about in that Dixie Crystal sugar sweet world you want to live in. And yes, I know you may not want the enclosed few pages, a copy of my graduation speech, but I wanted you to have them. Destroy them if you wish. However, if you do, first read them. Read them carefully, without prejudice. I have never felt as sure about anything as I do about those words. Change, Cole, change. It's rolling over us. Don't let it crush you. I replied to her letter, but did not hear from her again until Christmas. In a card, she enclosed a short note. I found my world, Cole, college. I love it. It loves me. I hope you're learning something in that backward little school that finally agreed to accept your enrollment. At least I hope you're not embarrassing yourself. Remember, you're supposed to be famous. Famous as in fame, my ridiculous friend. That is what resides in that sweaty little palm of yours. Someday it will happen. Someday. I loved writing letters. I absolutely love it. I sort of wish that it was a requirement in our school systems that you throw away the journaling that we teach and force children to do nothing but write letters. They'd be far better writers. All right. Oh, there's one other passage I want to read, and it's only a paragraph long. And I do that in honor of being in this library because when I was young, much younger, and started my writing of fiction and everything, I used to come to the library here to work. And it was a wonderful experience for me to be in an environment like this where there were millions and millions of words where you just sort of wallowed in them, you know. I think that's a good thing. This is a paragraph. I've always been at ease in libraries. In libraries, I discover stories that astonish me, stories that make me want to cry out in exhilaration and to worship the minds of those writers who took words and, like oil drops from the palettes of great painters, created visions so vivid they burned the eye of the reader. I like to walk the rows of bookshelves and run my fingers over the spines of books, brushing them lightly, reverently. I like the smell of books, the musk of paper and bindings, the slightly dusty odor of human touch. To me, libraries are like great restaurants, and books are the foods of my gluttony. I do love libraries, except when I have a book out. I hate them. Because I go in and I know if there's a chance that it's in there, there's only one, and they've got it hidden somewhere. You know, it's not under my name. It's somebody else's name. You get that. I walked in today, and first thing, a little story, Bill, I meant to tell you this. First thing I see is Terry Brooks, a poster for Terry Brooks there. I was doing a book signing once down in New Orleans at a huge chain store. And I went in and met the guy, and he said, your place is over there, blah, blah, blah. And I go over. I'm sitting there, not a single person shows up, not one. We all have been through this one. Nobody should. And finally, he gets on the loudspeaker and he says, ladies and gentlemen, we're delighted to have with us this afternoon an esteemed author, Terry Brooks. Mr. Brooks will be signing books over on the south side of the room, blah, 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 blah. He came by later and he said, somebody told me that I introduced you as Terry Brooks. I said, you did. And you didn't correct it. But I can tell you this, nobody likes Terry Brooks because nobody showed up. I want to take a few minutes to entertain questions. I love to do this. Just accept questions. It tests my creativity. Nobody has it, for God's sake. Okay, Jim, I knew Jim would. He's coming with a question. Yeah.
How did you select Mercer to publish your book?
How did I select Mercer to publish my book? That's part of the story of this thing. I had problems with the people in New York over me, over the fact that I wanted to write about the civil rights movement. I think New York publishers, for the most part, do not trust Southern writers to write about the South, especially when it comes to some sensitive topic like the civil rights movement. My argument with them was, well, isn't that rather silly? You've got somebody who's old enough to have grown up in segregation, to have seen desegregation, and the beginnings of integration. And I think that I've written, in the past, I have written thoughtfully about it. Why wouldn't you want me to do it? I just didn't want to fight with it anymore. And I'd get all this sort of stuff. Well, you can't do this. Well, you can't do. Hey, what? I can write anything I want to. That's crazy to say that. So I had been doing some consulting and work with the Mercer people, and they were good friends. And I just sent an email saying, I've got a manuscript. I wonder if you'd like to see it. And they said, yeah. So I sent it to them, and they sent back and said, we'd like to do it. So that's how. I'm very proud that I've been published by a regional publisher. I think that's where we're going to see a lot of publishing go now, especially if you think in terms of literary stuff. The New York publishing industry, they don't publish writing anymore. They publish writers. And have you read some of the writers they publish? My wife's here. I promised not to talk about them, so I won't do that. Anyone? Yes.
When did you write the first version? When did you finish the first version?
Oh my! When did I finish the first version of this? 25 years ago? Or longer? Might have been longer than that. It really might have been. Yeah, it was a long time ago. I've always liked these characters. I know a little bit about growing up in the South, just a little bit. But I never thought in terms of, okay, you're writing a Southern book, per se, though it is. What I thought was I was writing human condition. And whether that condition is in Georgia or Nevada, it wouldn't make much difference. The human condition is a human condition, Mm-hmm.
When you were at Peachtree Christian Church giving a talk several years ago, you were talking about brothers, two Methodist ministers.
Yes.
And a sister or two, and you gave some very charming and funny stories, as you have already, about them. And have they had any influence or entered your book in the guise of other characters?
I have. This is a good question about the influence of my siblings. I'm the 11th of 12 children. 7 older sisters. You want to know where I went into counseling? God knows. How many of you are familiar with the Dance with the White Dog? Okay. Can I tell you a quick White Dog story of my sisters? Before the book came out, we had a family reunion that we have every October. And I went to the reunion standing around. 2 of my sisters, both from Aiken, South Carolina, came up to me and they sort of trapped me and said, one of them who was sort of my surrogate mother when we were growing up, because the younger ones always had a surrogate mother. She said, honey, we read your book. I said, you did? Which one? The White Dog. I said, you did? I was really surprised. Nobody had it. It wasn't even published at the time. But the manuscript was circulating to some of the independent bookstores, and they picked it up from a bookstore who knew him. And I said, well, what did you think about it? Oh, we loved it, honey. It was so sweet. We cried and cried and cried. Mom and Daddy would be so proud of you and so happy. And they just keep talking. Well, one of the things my 7 sisters taught me, and ladies, please, I love women. Oh, my God. So if I say something that sounds offensive, I don't mean it to be offensive. But I learned this about ladies, that sometimes when they don't stop talking, you can expect a comma and a but. Huh? They're talking, and they wouldn't hush. And I knew that was coming. And finally, comma, but honey, why'd you have to put so much sex in it? Now, if you've read White Dog, you know there is no sex in White Dog. There's more sex in the first 12 verses of Genesis than there is in all of White Dog. That's right. Well, I thought they were kidding me, you know. I just, and my sister's trying to be clever. I'm cutting up with them and blah, 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 blah. And then I realized they weren't kidding. They were serious. They were dead serious about it. And I thought, what in the world are they talking about? And I thought, and I read, whoa, there's one paragraph. 4 sentences long, I think, that describes the old man under the influence of medication, dreaming about making love to his wife. I said, is that it? Well, yes. I said, why were you offended by that? I said, I mean, I know what you read. One of you subscribed to National Enquirer. Both of you read Conroy, and God, he's obscene. Especially compared to me. And I said, I don't understand. Well, it was about Mama and Daddy. I love it when they give me openings like that. I said, you idiots, there were 12 of us. But my family has been wonderful to me. They really have been. I get all these stories, you know, that they don't know I'm stealing them. My 2 older minister brothers, they're the 2 who really support me as a writer. I've never written in. I wrote, you know, I have a little book about the birth of Jesus called To Whom the Angel Spoke. My sisters found fault with that. I said, I took it out of the Bible. Well, it's not like the Bible. I said, no, it's different. It's an interpretation. It's called fiction. It's one of those things, you know. Anyway, but I do adore them. I do adore. The only people I've ever been afraid of in my life are my sisters. That's it. Yes.
You said you started writing at a newspaper. I wondered how you got into writing fiction.
By accident. By the man I just talked about, Mr. Conroy, Pat Conroy. He believed, I had left newspaper work after almost 15 years in it. I didn't think I was ever going to write anything again, ever. Didn't in plans to. I just wanted to get a job and support my family. And Conroy moved to Atlanta in 1973. He had just published The Waters Wide and was getting a lot of national recognition over it, as all of you would know. And he decided I ought to write fiction. He and I became very good friends. Learned later that we're actually cousins, but we didn't know it at the time at all. Distant cousins, thank God. There's some distance between us here. This is good. Anyway, Pat wanted me to do, and I kept saying, I don't want to do it. And I didn't. I really didn't. I had no interest in it at all. But one day he was having libations. Well, tea with our mutual friend Jim Townsend. The Townsend Literary Award is named for Jim. And the 2 of them got to talking about why I would not write fiction. And Pat said, I know how to make him do it. And he got up and went to the telephone and he called his editor at Houghton Mifflin in Boston. And he said he had just read 150 pages of a manuscript that his good friend Terry Kay was working on. And he thought it was wonderful and they ought to read it. And I got a letter from this woman named Ann Barrett, who I did not know at the time, but Ann Barrett was one of the real heavyweights in the publishing industry. She had been the American editor for J.R.R. Tolkien, so she was really a heavyweight. And got a letter begging for this manuscript that Conroy was raving about. And I called him and I said, what have you done? He said, yeah, you better come and let's talk about it. So I went over to his house and I yelled at him and cursed him and everything. And he finally said, you can do one of 2 things. You can tell her I lied, or you can write 150 pages. And he knew what I would do. So in 1 month, I wrote exactly 150 pages on a typewriter. You remember those things? For you young people, the typewriter does have a delete key on it. It's called the X key. X, just go. Anyway, I sent it off to get him off my back. That was the only reason I wrote it, was to prove to him I couldn't do it. Sent it off. To my great shock and surprise, they offered me a contract and an advance, a small, tiny advance, to write this novel based on one vignette that I'd written. That's how I got into it. You know, it's people tell me how. I say, get Pat and feed him a lot of tea. Yes.
I just completed, sent my first book to a publisher.
Uh-huh.
And I was trying to determine is there a standard for royalties? Like how much?
Yes, there's a basic standard for all those contracts that go. But my advice to you is don't go to a publisher. Go to an agent, and let that agent handle every bit of that. I have only handled one contract by myself, and that's this one right here. But the rest of them, I just let the agent handle them, and I have no earthly idea what they're doing. He sends me these things and says, sign where I put the X mark, and I sign and send it back to him. I don't know. I may have given him my children. I don't know. But the best thing to do is make sure you get somebody with knowledge to look at those contracts. Always do that.
How do you find a reputable agent?
Hardest thing in the world to do. Get one of those writing books and just go down the list. Start in New York, go down the list and write them and say, would you be interested in seeing my work? That's the only way it can be done, really. Yes.
I had read your Valley of Light,
Uh-huh.
and then my book club chose it as our monthly feature. And
Thank you.
I checked it out in the library to listen to it, and I didn't pay any attention when I checked it out. You were the reader.
I did the reading on that book.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
If I had a chance to read this one, because I love your book.
Well, you're very kind. Let me tell you, after the experience of reading The Valley of Light, don't think I'll ever do it again. And this is why. I went up to Minnesota, wherever it was to do, and I got up there. I had 4 days. And they said, well, we have an abridged and an unabridged version. I said, oh, you're going to do the unabridged and then edit? They said, oh, no. You're going to read it twice. I read the thing out loud twice in 4 days. I could barely speak when it was over. Yes.
Yes, my name is John Ogle with a nonprofit called Atlanta City of Peace, and we are building Atlanta's peace legacy to honor Dr. King and other peacemakers who have built our city's peace legacy. I think it's particularly auspicious that you're presenting your book today about, this wonderful love story and civil rights and human rights on the exact anniversary date of Dr. King's world-famous speech.
Well, my goodness.
I have a dream.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate that.
4th anniversary today.
I consider that, and I think I have it in this book, I consider that a prayer. I think that that's the most eloquent prayer. That's why the first title for the first effort was called A Prayer of Dreamers. It was based on that speech. Thank you for bringing it up, John.
My question is, I was wondering if you could give a sentence or two about a moral for the story that you've written.
Yes. I will try to say this as succinctly as possible. I think that prayer, that speech, was a prayer, and I think it was a dream. That dream is not realized, and that dream will probably never be fully realized, except in one thing, and that is one-to-one relationships. One-to-one, I think it will be realized, and I think it is realized daily on a one-to-one basis. I don't know that total assimilation of different cultures is at all possible. Over time, perhaps, but I do know that assimilation of caring for one another is very possible, and is the thing that I think we ought to be striving for. Good question. Thank you. Anybody? I'll take one or two more.
Talk a little bit more. I was astounded at what I'll call the whittling down process. You said from 8,000 pages to 230 something. So
What I do in the whittling down process is I just keep it all. I store it somewhere, and that's the magic of computers. You can really do that sort of thing. I always start from a character. I don't mind throwing everything away and start again from a character's point of view. This character versus that character. And every time I did that, I learned more about the total story because I was learning more. I was hearing it from another character, from another perspective. And in that whittling down process, it's just a rewriting. You simply think, well, I never wrote it before. But then as you're writing, you think, oh, I remember the paragraph I just read you about libraries. That was probably in the first version. But when I got to this version of it, I remembered it as a paragraph that I simply liked. It was something that meant something to me. So I wanted to pick it up, and you go back and you jerk and put it over there. And that's kind of, I guess you could say, cut and paste as much as anything else. Though I don't want to pass it off that simply. I retype everything because I want to know that rhythmically it's right. Matters.
As an author, I wondered if you have a favorite book, or as you write each book, like this is your new book, is this your favorite book now, or do you have feelings about, strong feelings about each book?
It's almost impossible to say one is favorite. I will tell you, I do have a favorite experience. My first novel is my favorite writing experience because it was the first one, and I promise you, it's by far inferior to others in terms of what the writing is. What I learned about writing over the years, this is a much better written book than the first novel. But as far as a personal writing experience, that is my favorite and probably always will be. My favorite character I've written was Lottie in the book Taking Lottie Home. Though I will tell you, Marie pushes Lottie. She really pushes Lottie. So it's hard when you're working on something. You get you have your favorite thing. I'm not a genre writer, so I write this time and the other time. I'm usually work on two things at once too, and switch, from different tenses and things like that. So I'm working constantly with characters, and my feeling is with the characters, not with the story, but with the characters. Yeah, Eddie.
Terry, I know you have a reputation for helping a lot of local folks kind of get into the business, and you're always real big on promoting Georgia authors and regional authors. I'm just curious, are there some titles or authors in your plug-in right now?
No, Eddie, I'm sorry. What was that last part of the question?
Are there some local or regional authors that you're plugging right now?
If I plug one, I wouldn't do the. Yes, I plug them all the time, but I do it not publicly. I do it personally, or I'll do it with publishers or things like that. I wouldn't want to take the risk on offending anybody and by leaving them out. I do believe strongly in the need to support. Everybody who knows me well knows that my platform for the last several years has been, people, we have an incredible history here in the state of Georgia. For God's sakes, let's celebrate it. Celebrate our people in the state. And that will always be my campaign. I hope to continue to do that.
Terry?
Yes.
Two more questions.
Two more.
before we go to the book signing.
I agree. Anybody? Yes.
Have you always kept your letter format in most of your versions, or when did they come to pass as your book?
They actually came to fruition in this. But I had used them to some degree in others, but mainly they came to fruition in this.
In your final version?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. One more? Yes.
This is not a question, this is an anecdote. My name is Jenny Davis. I met Terry, I met Pat Conroy, and River Siddons. We used to congregate at Cliff's Bookstore.
That's right.
Discuss writing. Well, Terry got famous, Pat got famous,
tell you that. For all of you, let me just say this last. I am so honored that you came out. Thank you for that, and thank you for caring about words. I'm a word maker. I don't know why I became a word maker. I just did, out of accident. But I do know this. If we didn't have word lovers, the word makers wouldn't exist. God love. Thank you.